A little girl and her dog, frozen together beneath the weight of a merciless snowstorm. No movement, no sound, just two fragile bodies curled beneath a dying sky, waiting for a miracle that never came. Until he found them. A young American officer, not trained for this kind of war, but led by the instincts of a canine hero by his side. One step closer, one heartbeat away from being too late. What happened next will remind you that not all heroes wear capes, some wear collars, and some carry badges. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story of survival and loyalty can travel. And if you believe no child, no dog, no soul should ever be left alone in the cold, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to hear will melt even the frostiest heart. The sky above Coldridge, Montana, hung like a leaden curtain that night, thick, heavy, and deaf to prayers. The wind screamed through the pine barrens and vacant streets, slamming against shuttered windows and layering the land in ghost-white silence. It was past midnight, and the storm had shown no mercy. Snow danced sideways under the amber glow of flickering streetlights. No one sane would have been outside in this. No one but Officer Ethan Moore and his canine partner, Ranger. Ethan's boots sank with each step into the crusted snow along a narrow maintenance road that twisted past the town's northern edge. The patrol car had been left parked half a mile behind, its tires chained, engine humming, on low idle in case they needed to retreat. Ethan wasn't big on small talk, even with himself. His breath steamed out in short, controlled bursts, and his dark brown eyes scanned the white horizon with trained precision. He stood just over 6 feet tall, wiry but capable, with sun-worn skin and high cheekbones that made him look sterner than he meant to. He had the stance of someone always braced for impact, part discipline, part experience, and part heartbreak. 5 years ago, his kid sister disappeared in a whiteout blizzard not far from here. They'd never found her. He still kept her silver locket in the inside pocket of his duty coat, a heart-shaped charm with a dent along the edge, an old souvenir from an arcade claw machine, and a final failed birthday gift. Ranger trotted by his side, nose low to the snow, shoulders shifting in fluid grace. 3 years old, sharp as a whip, his coat was a mix of rust and deep black, with a faint silver streak along the spine. A streak earned from a healed scar when he saved a hiker from a mountain lion last spring. Ranger had a scar under his left eye, too, almost invisible in the dark, but it gave him a permanent look of quiet judgment. He didn't bark without cause, didn't bolt without command. A partner like no other. Ethan had learned to trust Ranger's instincts more than any compass. Tonight was routine check the outskirts after the storm alert. Make sure no vehicles had gone off-road, no drifters trapped in the forested gullies. But Ethan hated the quiet that snowstorms brought. Too clean, too soft, the kind of quiet that could bury screams without a trace. Ranger stopped. No sound preceded it, no obvious sign. 1 second they were walking, the next, the dog froze mid-stride, ears pricked, body tense. His right paw hovered above the snow, unmoving. Ethan felt it too, that ripple of dread crawling up his spine. "What is it?" he asked under his breath. Ranger didn't respond with sound. He simply took 3 cautious steps forward, nose twitching into the wind. Then he turned his head, looked at Ethan with eyes sharp as glass, and moved again slow and low toward the left, away from the path, into deeper snow. Ethan followed, heart rate ticking up, hand resting over the flashlight clipped to his belt. He scanned the area ahead. Visibility was minimal, but the beam cut through enough to paint outlines. Snow swirled, pines loomed like sleeping giants. Then, near the tree line, a dark patch broke the smooth white. At first, it looked like a pile of branches, but as Ethan moved closer, details sharpened. The outline was all wrong for wood. It was curled small, a bundle of limbs and cloth and... no, not cloth, hair, a little girl. Ethan's body responded before his mind finished the sentence. He moved faster now, each stride punching into the snow. Ranger beat him to it, skidding to a halt inches from the figure, nose dipping low. She was lying on her side, curled into herself. Her jacket, pink and thin, was crusted with frost. 1 boot missing. Her arms wrapped tightly around something pressed against her chest. Ethan's breath caught as he realized what it was. A dog. Tiny, maybe 8 pounds at most. A terrier or mutt mix covered in ice and dirt. Unmoving, but tucked into her as if it had crawled there to protect her with its last ounce of warmth. Its head rested beneath her chin, almost like a pillow. Neither of them stirred. "Dear God," Ethan whispered. He dropped to his knees just as the wind gusted again, throwing snow against his back like sandpaper. His gloved fingers hovered for a moment above the child's shoulder, afraid to touch, afraid she'd crumble under his hand. Ranger stood beside him now, silent, posture still tense. The flashlight beam wavered slightly in Ethan's grip as he leaned closer, eyes darting between the girl's face and the dog she held like a lifeline. Her lips were pale blue. There was no visible bleeding, no sign of trauma, just a terrifying stillness. Her hair, long and dark, was frozen in strands against her face, lashes white with frost. She looked about 9 years old, and she wasn't alone. That dog, despite its tiny frame, despite the cold, had stayed, had held on, and now they were here. The first thing Ethan noticed, once the wind calmed just long enough for him to really see, was her eyelashes, thick with frost, unmoving but unmistakably human. He reached down, brushing snow away from her face with his gloved hand, revealing a young girl's delicate features, pale from cold. She looked about 9, maybe 10, her cheeks sunken, lips parted just slightly as if mid-whisper. Her breath, if there at all, came in shallow pulses. Yet what stopped him from tipping into panic was not her face, but the strange way she clutched something close to her chest, something alive. A small dog. A terrier mix, no more than 10 pounds. Its fur soaked and frozen at the tips. Patches of white and tan peeked through the frost, and its eyes, half-lidded, cloudy lifted toward Ethan just long enough to register his presence. It gave a faint, high-pitched whine, then burrowed deeper into the girl's jacket, trembling. Still alive? Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Then came Ranger, who stepped forward without hesitation and lowered his body beside them. The German shepherd pressed close, flank to flank with the tiny dog, forming a barrier of heat. His breath fogged against the girl's temple as he sniffed once, then lay his head near her ear, still and steady. "You're doing good, buddy," Ethan murmured, voice catching. "Hold them both. I've got the rest." Without delay, Ethan unfastened the thermal emergency blanket from his kit and wrapped it around the girl and her dog. He worked quickly, delicately, as if wrapping porcelain. She didn't react, no stirring, no blinking. But her arms were still curled around the little dog with unconscious purpose. He checked for signs of injury, no blood, no fractures, but her skin was like ice to the touch. Ethan gathered her in his arms. Her weight was almost nothing. Her name was still a mystery, her story even more so. The dog made a soft sound as it was lifted with her, pressed against her chest. Ethan wrapped both in his duty coat before standing and turning toward Ranger. "Come." Ranger rose instantly, snow clinging to his legs and belly. He moved ahead through the path they'd made earlier, retracing their way back to the patrol car. The wind picked up again as they moved, slicing through the air like glass. Ethan held the child tightly against his body, his fingers tightening unconsciously when she shuddered slightly, barely perceptible, but it was movement, a sign she was still fighting. Each step felt heavier, not just because of the deep snow, but because something had shifted in him. The image of the girl curled beside her tiny protector echoed too perfectly with a memory he'd tried for years to bury. The last day of his canine training, 5 years ago. The day everything almost ended. Back then, Ethan had been assigned to an older shepherd named Duke. A veteran dog with tired eyes and half a tail, Duke had saved 3 hikers from an avalanche 2 winters prior. During a drill on the slopes, Ethan slipped on an iced-over ridge and fell. Heart of his wrist shattered, shoulder dislocated, radio lost. Cold settled fast, panic faster, but Duke didn't leave. He'd crawled over Ethan, tail wrapped around the boy's chest like a belt, his nose nudging him every few minutes. The team didn't find them until hours later. Ethan came out of it with scars, physical and otherwise. He almost quit the program. Almost. Ranger came after, a stray rescue, selected for his intelligence and fierce loyalty, but nearly deemed too reactive for patrol work. Ethan had insisted, trained him slow, with patience. They built something that couldn't be logged in a report or recorded on video, a bond etched into instinct. Now, years later, here they were, Ethan carrying a child on the edge of death, and Ranger warming a stranger with the same calm he once gave his handler. The patrol car came into view, buried halfway under snowfall. Steam rose from its exhaust, muffled by the storm. Ethan pulled open the back door, gently laying the girl and her dog across the back seat. wrapping them again in the blanket. Ranger jumped in beside them without command and curled close, pressing his large body against them like a furnace. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and started speaking into the dispatch radio. Dead silence. The antenna must have iced over. Cell signal non-existent out here. Damn it! He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, then turned back to look. The little dog's eyes had closed, but it was breathing, shallow and fast. The girl hadn't moved, but her fingers had relaxed slightly around her dog's fur. That was enough. He shifted into gear, tires crunching slowly out of the snowbank, headlights cutting a path through the swirling white. The engine groaned against the cold as Ethan pressed deeper into the storm. The defroster struggled against ice building up on the inside of the windshield, and the wipers screeched with every pass. He kept one hand tight on the wheel and the other braced near the heater vents, just inches from the little girl huddled in the back seat. Her breath was still faint, visible only in the smallest of fogged exhales. Wrapped in 2 layers of thermal blankets, she remained unconscious, her small body curled protectively around the trembling terrier in her arms. Benny. That name hadn't been spoken aloud yet, but Ethan had found it, stitched in uneven, hand-sewn letters onto a scrap of faded flannel poking out of her canvas backpack. Maddie and Benny, forever side by side. The thread was pink and frayed in places, like it had been sewn by a child's hand or a loving parent late at night. Ethan turned that piece of fabric over in his mind more than once as the road curved through the white void. Whoever this girl was, whoever made that stitch, someone had loved her very much, and she had loved Benny enough to protect him even as she lost consciousness. Ranger remained in the back with them. The large German shepherd had wedged himself between the seat and the child, his head resting on her hip, his body curved protectively around hers and the little dog. Every so often he would lift his head, check the girl's face, then lower it again as if confirming they were still alive. "Keep her warm," Ethan whispered, without turning his head. "You're doing good." He reached for the radio again. The signal had been dead on approach, and for a time the only thing the speaker produced was static. He adjusted the frequency, angled the antenna control near the windshield. Nothing. His jaw clenched as he swerved past a snow-covered mailbox. Then finally, faint, crackled, he heard something. "Say again. Identify." Ethan grabbed the handset. "Unit 24, Officer Moore, Coldridge Patrol. I've got a child female, unknown age, possibly hypothermic. Also one canine non-aggressive, smaller breed both, alive but unresponsive. Requesting emergency response, over." There was a pause, more static, then a different voice answered, a woman's, older, composed, but strained. "Unit 24, this is Coldridge General. Say your location and ETA. The storm has taken out half our grid. We've got limited staff, but we're prepping ER now. 5 miles out, approaching West Slope Turnpike. I'm coming in hot," Ethan said, one hand tightening on the wheel as his foot pressed the gas a little harder. "Copy. Drive safe, officer. We've got you." The voice belonged to Dr. Grace Holloway, who had taken over the emergency wing of Coldridge General just 2 years earlier. In her late 40s, with streaks of gray in her braided black hair, Grace was a no-nonsense kind of woman, tall, broad-shouldered, with the stride of someone who had once run marathons and the glare of someone who had once raised teenage sons alone. She didn't care for bureaucracy, didn't use titles, and never forgot a face. When her youngest son died in a flood while she was stuck in surgery during her residency, something hardened in her, but it made her sharper, not cruel. In Coldridge, people knew if you ended up in the ER, and Grace was there, your odds just got better. Inside the car, Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes darting between the frost-coated road and the rearview mirror. "Hang in there, kid," he murmured. Another gust slammed into the side of the vehicle. Snow tore across the glass like claws. The road curved right, then dipped. Visibility dropped. He flipped on the high beams and leaned forward instinctively, as though it would help him see more. The heater was running full blast now, but the car still felt like the inside of a walk-in freezer. The blankets had started to thaw the frost from the girl's hair, leaving small beads of water along her cheekbones. Benny stirred, just barely. His head moved, ears twitching once, then stillness again. Ethan glanced again at the note inside her backpack. Next to the stitched cloth had been a child's drawing. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, and a dog in between. The smaller figure had a pink triangle dress, and above her was scrawled, "Me and Benny, Daddy's watching from the sky." That line hit him harder than he expected. He didn't know this girl's name yet, not officially, but something in his gut whispered Maddie. It wasn't just the fabric or the drawing. It was the way her arms wouldn't unclench from around that dog, even in near death. The way Ranger had pressed close like she was already part of the team. He blinked hard, pressed on. The road cleared briefly, shielded by a row of tall pines. On his left, snowdrifts rose into jagged white hills. On his right, the slope dropped sharply. Somewhere beyond that was the river, half frozen and deadly this time of year. He kept the car steady, one hand now gripping the wheel with white knuckles. Behind him, Ranger let out a soft chuff. Ethan didn't need to look, he knew. The girl had stirred. "She moved?" he asked aloud, half turning. Ranger responded with another low chuff, then licked the side of her head gently. Ethan let out a shaky breath. "We're gonna make it. We're gonna get you there." He turned back to the windshield, just as the final curve straightened out. In the distance, through the flurries and haze, the blinking orange lights of Coldridge General Hospital broke through the whiteness like a lighthouse on the edge of a frozen sea. The automatic doors at Coldridge General Hospital whooshed open with a reluctant groan as Ethan burst through them, his arms cradling the lifeless weight of the little girl. Snow blew in behind him, trailing over the gray tile floors like a ghost unwilling to let go. Inside, the air was warm but tense, filled with the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the clipped footsteps of night staff moving fast. "Emergency intake, 9 or 10 years old, hypothermia," Ethan's voice echoed across the near-empty lobby. Within seconds, Dr. Grace Holloway appeared, flanked by a younger nurse and a male orderly. Grace moved quickly, tall, powerful in her stride, and completely composed, her jaw clenched as her eyes swept over the child in Ethan's arms. "Vitals?" "Unconscious, breathing shallow, body cold to the core. I estimate her body temp around 25 Celsius, maybe lower," Ethan said, still walking. Ranger paced beside him, silent and alert. "Let's get her on the table. Room 2. Warm IVs, thermal wraps, and contact NICU support. Now," Grace commanded. The orderly, Jared, a broad-shouldered man in his early 30s with freckled skin and soft blue eyes, nodded and took the lead, guiding Ethan into a side corridor. The girl Maddie, as Ethan had come to call her silently, was transferred to a gurney by the team with swift precision. Her arms were still curled around Benny, who had not uttered a sound since the car ride. The little terrier's body was limp but breathing. As they wheeled Maddie away, another figure appeared in the hallway. She was in her early 50s, short and slim, with graying blonde hair tucked into a low bun and a knitted lavender cardigan draped over her scrubs. This was Olivia Kearns, the hospital's head nurse. Olivia was known in town for being soft-spoken but unshakable, a woman whose calm could hold steady even when others broke. Her eyes were kind but lined with fatigue born from years of night shifts and hard losses. Olivia looked at the bundle in Ethan's arms, the tiny dog he still cradled carefully in the other blanket, and extended her hands gently. "I'll take him. We have a vet technician on call for emergencies. They're prepping now." Ethan hesitated a second, then passed Benny into her arms. The little dog stirred, his head lifting weakly. Olivia smiled. "Hang in there, sweetheart," she whispered. "Will he make it?" Ethan asked, voice quieter now. "If he's survived this long," Olivia said, turning toward the elevator, "he's got more fight in him than most." Ethan leaned against the wall, finally letting his back hit the cold plaster, heart still thudding. Ranger sat beside him, his tail barely twitching. The hallway buzzed with motion nurses calling codes, footsteps echoing, the faint beep of vital monitors somewhere behind closed doors. Then Olivia returned, minus Benny, and without saying anything, sat next to him on the wooden bench. She didn't speak for a few moments, letting the quiet settle between them like a blanket. "I lost my daughter in a house fire," she said finally. Ethan turned his head slightly. "She was 6. I wasn't home. Gas leak sparked while she was playing with crayons in the living room. I thought—" Her voice cracked once, then returned, steady as stone. "I thought there was no chance, but when the firefighters pulled her out, she was curled in the hallway, and our cat, Muffin, had been lying on her chest, covered in soot, burned on her back, but alive." Ethan's eyes softened. "She lived. I mean, we lost the house, and Muffin never walked the same again. But my daughter, she lived." Olivia gave a small smile, one that trembled at the corners. "That cat didn't weigh more than 8 pounds, but she shielded a child with everything she had, And you'd be surprised what a little warmth can do. Ethan stared down at Ranger. Animals know more than we give them credit for. They do, Olivia said. That big boy of yours, he knew what he was doing. He gave that girl a chance. Just then, Dr. Grace reappeared from around the corner, tugging off a pair of latex gloves. Her face betrayed nothing, but her voice carried weight. She's stable for now. Body temp is up to 28. We've started rewarming procedures, bear hugger, warm IV fluids, warmed oxygen. She's still unresponsive, but her vitals are trending in the right direction. Ethan exhaled, shoulders sagging. There's a long road ahead, Grace added, crossing her arms. But you got her here in time. Minutes later, we might be having a different conversation. Thank you, Ethan said, his voice raspy. You did your part, Grace replied. Now, let us do ours. Olivia stood and nodded toward the other end of the hall. Let me get you some coffee. I'm good, Ethan murmured. You're not, she said with a knowing smile. But you will be. As Olivia disappeared around the corner, Ethan stood up slowly and walked to the window at the far end of the hall. The storm was still raging outside. Snow plastered the glass, swirling in wild arcs, but inside the hospital it was still, warm. Ranger stood next to him, his eyes watching the closed ER doors where Maddie was being treated. The German shepherd let out a soft breath, and Ethan reached down to rest a hand between his ears. You did good, partner, he whispered. The address on the worn student ID card was handwritten in blue ink, slightly smudged, tucked in a plastic sleeve inside the girl's small canvas backpack. Ethan stared at it for a moment beneath the soft yellow light of the hospital's front entrance. He repeated it in his mind, committed it to memory. He didn't need to search maps. He knew that road. A dead-end street at the northern edge of Coldridge, near the woods. Quiet, isolated, a few weathered cabins that looked more like they belonged in the pages of a snowbound novel than a modern town. Ranger walked close by his side, his ears forward, gaze steady. The storm had eased just slightly, reduced now to flurries, but the sky still hung low and heavy. Ethan's tires crunched on the packed snow as he guided the cruiser down a narrow lane that twisted between tall pine trees. Each house they passed was dark or half-lit, porches buried in drifts. Then he saw it. A small log house, barely 2 stories high, with warm light spilling through thin curtains in one front window. There were no tire tracks in the driveway, only footprints leading from the door to the road and back again, many, frantic, pacing. Ethan parked and stepped out. Ranger remained at his side. As they approached the porch, he saw movement through the window. A figure small-framed, with wild hair pulled into a loose bun standing near the window, clutching a phone. She hadn't seen them yet. He knocked. Footsteps, the creak of floorboards. Then the door opened just a few inches, guarded by a rusted chain. The woman behind the door had the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and swollen, her skin pale with that yellow hue that stress brings. Wisps of hair had fallen from her bun, clinging to her cheeks. Her voice, when it came, cracked under the weight of hope and fear. Yes, ma'am, Ethan said gently, holding his badge up. Are you Lily Johnson? Her breath hitched. Yes. I think I found your daughter. The chain rattled. The door opened wider. Lily's hands shot to her mouth as her knees buckled. She stumbled back a step, gripping the edge of the doorway to stay upright. Maddie? Her voice was barely above a whisper. She's alive? She is. She's stable at Coldridge General. She was found during the patrol. The dog with her, Benny, is alive too. They stayed together. Lily let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh before her body folded in on itself. She sank down onto the edge of the porch in her slippers, shaking violently as tears poured freely down her cheeks. Her fingers clutched her robe at the chest, as if to hold her heart from breaking all over again. I thought she was dead, she whispered, rocking slightly. Oh God, I thought I lost her. Ethan knelt down in front of her, placing a comforting hand on her arm. You didn't. She's going to need time, but she's here. And she kept Benny warm. She fought. Lily wiped her face, but the tears kept coming. After a moment, she stood shakily and ushered Ethan inside with a quiet, breathless, please. The house smelled like cinnamon and burnt toast. A small living room opened into a kitchen with chipped countertops and warm light glowing under old oak cabinets. A plate of uneaten spaghetti sat on the table, congealed and cold. On the counter, 2 mugs, one still steaming, slightly stood untouched. In the living room, a pink scarf lay balled on the sofa, next to a small fleece jacket that still held the imprint of a child's body. A crayon drawing was pinned with a magnet to the fridge. A girl holding hands with a small dog, both smiling under a rainbow. Above the drawing was written, Maddie plus Benny equals best friends forever. Ethan took it all in silently. I made dinner, but she never came back, Lily said, her voice distant now as she stood by the sink. School closed early. She usually takes the shortcut behind the ridge. The storm came fast. I thought she'd gotten caught somewhere, maybe waited it out at a friend's, but no one had seen her. Her phone must have died. I walked the roads, yelled into the woods. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The police said the storm made search impossible. Her hands clutched the sink's edge, white-knuckled. I thought I'd find her frozen, or not at all. Ethan stepped closer. She was curled up in the snow, holding Benny. That dog never left her. And Ranger here, he found them. Only then did Lily notice the German shepherd standing quietly at Ethan's side. She stepped forward hesitantly, then dropped to one knee and gently stroked Ranger's thick fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding my baby." Ranger leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. After a moment of stillness, Lily turned and looked Ethan in the eye. "Can I see her?" "You can. I'll drive you there now if you're ready." She nodded. "Just let me grab her blanket. She hates hospitals, always says they're too cold." Ethan smiled softly. "She's a fighter. She'll be glad to see you." The third morning broke in Coldridge with a thin veil of sunlight pressing timidly through the snow-laced windows of the pediatric ICU. The storm had passed overnight, leaving behind a shimmering stillness that clung to the pine-covered hills like a breath held too long. Inside room 203, the hush was not of fear, but of waiting. Hope, so fragile and tender, hovered in the air like the steam curling from a mug of untouched tea. Ethan sat in a plastic chair beside the hospital bed, one hand loosely resting on his knee, the other absently rubbing the back of Ranger's neck. The German shepherd lay curled at his feet, alert but unmoving. On the bed, under layers of warmed blankets, Maddie's small frame stirred faintly. Her hair had been combed gently to one side by the night nurse, a soft pink band holding back the strands from her pale forehead. Monitors beeped with steady rhythm. Her temperature had stabilized at 36.1 degrees overnight. Her breathing no longer rattled. The nurse on duty, Caitlin Reese, moved with the quiet grace of someone who had worked enough night shifts to know when not to speak. She was in her early 30s, with dark auburn hair pinned in a loose braid, freckles across her cheeks, and a voice as soft as snowfall. She'd been assigned to Maddie's case since her arrival. Caitlin was known among staff not for dramatic diagnoses or speed, but for stillness, for being the person who stayed in the room when everyone else left. She never rushed children awake, never filled silence with false comfort. Her own son, born with a weak heart and lost at 2 months old, had made her into someone who knew exactly how to hold a fragile moment without breaking it. At 6:42 a.m., Maddie's eyelids fluttered. Ethan leaned forward slowly, heart hitching. Caitlin turned, then froze. She didn't speak, only stepped closer. Maddie blinked, long and slow, like surfacing from a dream she hadn't meant to wake from. Her eyes, soft hazel flecked with green, drifted across the sterile ceiling, then down toward the movement near her feet. Ranger had already risen to his elbows, watching her with quiet intensity. When her gaze finally met his, something sparked a shift in her face. The way her eyebrows pulled together, lips parted slightly. Ethan spoke gently. "Hey there, kiddo." Her head turned slowly, and she saw him. Her eyes registered confusion first, then fear. "It's okay, you're safe," he added, keeping his tone calm. "I'm Ethan. I found you out in the snow. Ranger here helped, and someone's been waiting to see you." At that, the door creaked open. Caitlin nodded once, and a moment later, Olivia, the head nurse, stepped in, carrying something small and wrapped in a blanket the color of sand. Benny. The little dog was clean now, his fur fluffed but still thin, a tiny pink bandage wrapped around one paw. He had slept almost non-stop since being rescued, but when he entered the room, his ears twitched. Then he whined, soft and urgent, wiggling free of Olivia's arms. Maddie's eyes lit up, lips trembling. She let out a whisper, barely a breath. "Benny!" Olivia stepped forward carefully, placing the dog onto the blanket near Maddie's side. Benny nosed her chest with unsteady excitement, then collapsed against her with a soft sigh. Maddie's fingers, stiff but responsive, moved through his fur. Her lower lip quivered, then broke into the faintest, most radiant smile Ethan had ever seen. And then, without hesitation, Ranger stepped closer and rested his broad head on the bed's edge. Maddie turned toward him, her fingers still buried in Benny's coat. She studied Ranger for a long moment, then slowly reached out. Her hand, small and trembling, found his snout. Ranger licked her palm gently, once, then settled in. Caitlin stepped back, eyes glassy. Ethan leaned his elbows on his knees, letting out a long, quiet breath. He had seen many things in his years on the force: crashes, violence, grief, and somewhere along the way, he'd stopped waiting for goodness to appear unannounced. But sitting there, in that quiet room, with a girl who should have died and two dogs who hadn't left her side, something in him began to thaw, like ice melting at the edges of an old scar. Maddie turned to look at him again. "Are you the one who brought me here?" Ethan nodded. "Me and Ranger, but you helped too. You held on." She didn't answer. She just looked at Ranger again and whispered, "He's big." "He's a big softy," Ethan said. "Saved a few lives before yours, but I think he likes you best." She smiled again, brighter this time. Caitlin moved to check the IV, quietly scribbling on her chart. A moment later, Lily appeared at the door, her hair brushed back, wearing the same scarf Maddie had left on the couch, eyes rimmed red from crying, but glowing with something deeper now: peace. Maddie saw her and gasped, "Mommy!" The heart monitor spiked for a moment as Lily rushed to the bedside. She knelt, holding her daughter's hand tightly, tears falling freely again, but this time they were warm, grateful tears. Ethan stood, backing away to give them space. Ranger followed him, stretching before settling by the door, head resting on his paws. He watched the family quietly, hand resting on Ranger's back. Something new had started here, not just for Maddie, but for himself. Something he hadn't allowed in for years: belief, in second chances, in the idea that even the worst winters end. The morning of their discharge arrived with sunlight pouring through the windows, like warm syrup, melting the last edges of snow from the glass. In room 203 of Coldridge General, Maddie sat upright in her bed, her small legs dangling over the edge, pink socks barely brushing the floor. Her cheeks had gained back some color, and though her arms were still thin and her frame a little frail, her eyes were bright. Benny rested in her lap, tail thumping slowly with each soft stroke of her hand. Lily stood nearby, folding Maddie's spare clothes into a small duffel bag. She looked different now, her face no longer tight with grief, but flushed with relief, eyes softer, shoulders less tense. She wore a plain gray sweater and jeans, her hair tied in a neater bun. There was still a quiet hesitance in her movements, like someone recovering from a long nightmare, but there was strength underneath. It was the kind of strength that only comes from walking through fire and making it out the other side. Ethan leaned against the doorway, with Ranger sitting faithfully beside him, the German shepherd's gaze flicking between Maddie and Benny. The warmth in the room, the quiet joy, felt earned. "She looks good," Ethan said softly. "She's ready," Lily replied, "though I think she'd rather stay another night just to keep Benny under the heated blanket." Maddie smiled at that, but didn't look up. "He likes it here. He gets all the chicken he wants." Caitlin Reese entered with the discharge papers, her braid coiled tighter today. Blue scrubs, crisp and clean. "Everything's signed. Dr. Holloway says Maddie's clear to go. Just keep her warm, lots of rest, soft foods for a few days." She turned to the little girl. "And no snow for at least 2 weeks, okay?" Maddie raised her hand solemnly, like a promise. Benny yawned. As Lily zipped up the duffel, Ethan stepped forward, kneeling in front of Maddie. "Hey, before you go, I wanted to ask something." Maddie looked at him, tilting her head. "There's a program I work with. It's for kids who have gone through tough things, like accidents or trauma. It helps them heal by letting them work with animals, dogs, mostly. Sometimes they help train rescue pups or just spend time with them. But I think you and Benny could help other kids feel safe again." "You already helped me." Lily blinked, surprised. "You think she'd be able to?" "Only if you're comfortable," Ethan said. "It's not about pressure, just giving what she already has." Maddie glanced at Benny. The dog looked up at her, then licked her arm once, as if answering for both of them. "I want to," she said softly. "Can Ranger come too?" Ethan smiled. He'd like that. Later that week, the sun over Coldridge thawed the last of the icicles from the roofs, and Lily returned to her job at Maple and Birch, a small bakery nestled on Main Street. The shop sat on a corner lot with wide windows that always fogged up in winter and smelled like cinnamon and rising dough. The place had been struggling lately. Too many storms, not enough tourists, but regulars still stopped in for her lemon poppy seed muffins and honey wheat loaves. On Maddie's first day back with her mother, she wore a light yellow beanie and sat at the front corner table with Benny perched proudly in a cushion-lined basket at her feet. A handwritten sign, drawn by Maddie herself in marker, stood on the table. "Meet Benny, the snow hero." A small tin beside it read, "Tips for dog treats." The story of the storm rescue had already made its way through town. Ethan never intended for it to be public, but someone at the hospital had shared a photo with a local blog, and from there, it had traveled faster than a wind-blown flake. Now, customers came not just for scones, but to see Maddie's shy smile and pet the dog who'd stayed beside her in the storm. One customer, Mrs. Doreen Halpern, a retired school librarian in her 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and silver hair always tied in a scarf, visited every Friday morning. She brought peanut butter treats and called Benny Sir Benjamin like he was royalty. She'd lost her own grandson to pneumonia years ago and had adopted Maddie in her heart within minutes of meeting her. Benny soaked up the affection, but never strayed far from Maddie. He remained calm, loyal, and alert. His limp had improved, and his fur grew thicker each week. And Ranger? He visited often. Ethan would bring him by after patrol, and the German Shepherd would settle under the bakery table like he belonged there. Maddie had started brushing his coat, speaking to him in hushed tones. Ranger always listened. Ethan had taken to staying for coffee when he dropped Ranger off. At first, it was quick grab a cup, nod at Lily, and leave. But over time, those visits lingered. He learned that Lily used to be a teacher before the bakery, that she lost her husband to cancer 4 years ago, and had since raised Maddie alone, that she baked not for profit, but to remember her mother, who used to sing while kneading dough. And Lily learned that Ethan used to be different before his sister's death, that he had once dreamed of moving to Alaska to train avalanche dogs, that sometimes he still couldn't sleep if he didn't check the weather twice. But mostly, they both learned how to sit in silence that wasn't lonely. A full month had passed since that night, since the storm, the cold, the desperate drive, and the quiet fight for life. Coldridge now wore a gentler face. The snow had begun to recede, revealing the muddy browns and early greens beneath, like the town was slowly waking from a long sleep. On this late March afternoon, sunlight filtered through still bare branches, casting slivers of gold over the walking path that wound through Maple Ridge Park, where the ground was soft and damp, the air crisp but not bitter. Ethan walked slowly with Ranger, who moved with an easy grace, tail swaying at ease. His black and rust coat shimmered in the light, thick and well-brushed, thanks to a very dedicated little girl who insisted on grooming him each week at the bakery. Ethan wore his uniform pants, but no badge today, just a navy jacket and a wool scarf that still smelled faintly of flour and cinnamon. He wasn't on duty, he was somewhere in between, somewhere closer to home. As they rounded a bend near the edge of the park's frozen pond, he saw her. Maddie sat on a wooden bench under the sycamore tree that hadn't yet bloomed, a wool blanket around her shoulders and Benny curled at her side. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her boots muddy from wandering the grass, but her eyes were shining. She held something in her lap, a piece of thick art paper, slightly crinkled at the corners and colored in vibrant pastels. She jumped up when she saw them. "Ranger!" she called. The German Shepherd perked up and trotted ahead, his ears up, tongue lolling in excitement. Maddie dropped to her knees as he reached her, wrapping her arms around his neck. Benny wagged his tail and gave one bark, then nestled closer into Maddie's boots. Ethan reached them a moment later, smiling. "You promised you'd stay seated," he said, mock stern. "I tried," Maddie grinned, "but Ranger walks too slow when I'm sitting." She held out the drawing to him. "This is for you." Ethan took the paper carefully. The picture was unmistakable. 3 figures, 1 tall man, 1 big dog, 1 small girl holding a leash attached to a smaller dog. All were standing in snow, under a soft blue sky with flakes still falling. The tall man had dark brown hair and a badge drawn over his coat. The words at the bottom were written in blocky, uneven handwriting, but clear as day. "You saved us. All of us." Ethan's throat tightened as he crouched to her level. "This is the best thing anyone's ever given me." "It's true," she said simply. Then came Lily, walking down the slope from the park entrance with a paper bag in hand. She wore a light coat, a yellow scarf, and jeans with a faint flour stain near one knee. evidence she'd come straight from the bakery. Her cheeks were wind-chilled, but her eyes crinkled with warmth when she saw Ethan holding the drawing. "Did she give it to you?" Lily asked as she arrived. Ethan stood, holding it up. "She did. I'm framing it." Lily smiled, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. It was soft, warm, and full of meaning. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing her back, for everything since." He didn't know what to say, so he hugged her back and let the silence do the speaking. That evening, Ethan returned with them to their small home tucked just beyond the tree line. It was warm inside, glowing with lamplight, and something else, something slower, deeper, and growing steadily. Dinner was chicken pot pie with mashed potatoes, followed by a lopsided apple tart that Maddie insisted on cutting herself, though her slices were wildly uneven. At the kitchen table, Ranger lay stretched out beneath Ethan's feet, his chin resting on one paw. Benny, in a favorite red sweater knitted by one of the bakery regulars, was curled in Maddie's lap, his nose tucked into the crook of her arm. They looked so at peace together that Ethan almost didn't want to move. At one point, Maddie leaned over and whispered something into Benny's ear. The little dog's ears twitched. Then she looked up at Ethan and asked, "Do you think dogs know what love means?" Ethan paused, looked down at Ranger, and then said, "I think they're the only ones who never forget." Lily glanced across the table at Ethan. Their eyes met. No need for words. Later, while Lily washed dishes and Maddie curled up with a book on the couch, Ethan stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. The sky had shifted to lavender, the last light dancing along the snowy peaks far in the distance. The trees stood like sentinels in the fading glow, and for once, he didn't feel haunted by them. Behind him, he heard the soft pad of Ranger's paws. The shepherd sat beside him, exhaled deeply, and looked out toward the horizon as if to say, "We did it." Thus Ethan knelt beside him and rubbed his ears. "Yeah, bud, we really did." Sometimes, miracles don't come as flashes of light or heavenly voices. Sometimes, they come in the form of a loyal dog refusing to walk away, a child who never gives up on love, or a stranger who simply chooses to stop and care. In a world often cold and hurried, these moments, small as they seem, are the true work of God's hands. Maddie and Benny were not just saved from the snow that night. They were reminders that when we act with compassion, when we reach out even in uncertainty, we become instruments of grace. Maybe it was divine timing, maybe it was fate. But perhaps it was just one man, one dog, and one choice to not walk away. And in your everyday life, remember, love still rescues, kindness still heals, and miracles still walk among us, sometimes on four paws. If you believe God still works in quiet ways, if you believe every life, no matter how small, is sacred, type amen in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. And if you believe animals deserve love, not suffering, subscribe to the channel. Together, we can make this world a little softer, a little braver, a little more divine. God bless you wherever you are.